Hello and welcome back to part 7 in this series of videos where I show you how to set up your QNAP NAS right the very first time. And arguably this is going to be one of the most techy but also potentially dangerous things you can ever do with your NAS and your data, and that is to allow external access. In part 6 we talked about how to secure your NAS, make it as robust as possible, add as many layers as possible, add as many safeguards as possible, and ultimately have a QNAP NAS system that could not only withstand external access from DDoS or from multiple brute force hack attempts on the local area network, but also give you enough sufficient alert and warning when that happens to make provisions for it. And if you're going to follow the steps in this video, watch that video first. It should be recommended on the side of the screen because I'm not going to mention some of the safeguards for the sake of trying to repeat myself as little as possible, and you have to go through that video to understand some of the provisional safeguards you have to put within your system before you start following the steps in this guide, start allowing secure external access, because they will only be as secure as the system they are working with and vice versa. And in this video, it's also worth highlighting, you can kind of break this video down into the first and the second half. The first half is going to be the easy, obvious stuff. These are going to be ones where the QNAP is going to be accessed by you remotely using a relay portal. This is going to be, and you can ignore the if and IFTTT, if this then that stuff. Ultimately, this means that via at least one of 3 means that I'm going to describe to you, anywhere in the world, can access your QNAP NAS, but you're going to be bouncing from this little relay server in the middle. There's an official first-party way and 2 third-party ways I'm going to talk about. In the second half of the video, I'm going to talk about a different methodology for accessing the system, and that is going to be direct access to the system, often using encrypted portals, but ultimately meaning that you are going to be directly tapping into the service, or at the very least using a VPN service to bounce to and fro. More on that later on, but let's crack straight on. If you are a QNAP user and you want to use the most user-friendly method, the one that's the easiest, that is almost certainly going to be utilizing QNAP's own services. So on your QNAP, you'll see here on the left hand side, MyQNAPCloud. Bear in mind you will have had to have created a QNAP account in advance. That's an online QNAP account. It's completely for free and it's connected with your device, and that is what you can use to monitor your system remotely. It can also be used to push notifications and more in the event of something happens from log information, and you can also kind of integrate it with individual apps, the mobile apps, the desktop apps, even the client apps to your desktop that will allow you to integrate alerts and communication via that online relay portal there. So for example, if I go ahead and enter in here, we're using the disposable one we use in the channel all the time. This is our NAS compares Gmail throwaway. Once you've got in there, you're going to have to give this system a name. Now, bear in mind, what we're doing right now is giving this system an identifier. Later on in the video, we are going to be talking about DNS and DDNS systems. And this is a translation service, if you will, where you're changing the numbers that pretty much every server or website in the world is actually in the background called, but giving it actual alphanumeric values. In other words, letters, numbers as well, if you will. Now, what we're doing is not dissimilar to that. We're giving our system a name. So in this case, we're going to call this one QNAP Demo Test System. Terrible name. And luckily, it's available. Who knew? And as you can see, we're going to go ahead and allow this system to be named. This is what we're going to be taking advantage of later on. And again, you can let the system choose whether it's going to be local or remote access. If you're already running an organization of different systems and different overarching system admins, you may want to attach this to an existing one. If you do, click that tab there and go ahead and click next. So we're already creating that MyQNAPCloud remote access. But also there is that DNS option there, and the DDNS. That's going to be useful for when this system needs a label for when we're using these other remote access services that aren't QNAP, where the system may change its name and identity. And that is when we go through a domain name service, the DNS, to a dynamic domain name service. You may be paying extra to your internet service provider to have a fixed IP, but if you don't, you're going to have to enable DDNS because your identity may change and you may need to ebb and flow with that, because internet service providers can change that remote IP from time to time. I will also highlight in this video, occasionally you may see my external IP shown on screen. Don't worry, we're using a SIM dongle, a removable, disposable SIM. It means nothing, it will get thrown away. I might blank it out at times just for the sake of due diligence, but to be perfectly frank, if it makes its way through, it doesn't really matter, because again, it will be refreshed later on, even when someone else uses it, and it's a disposable SIM router we're using here. So I'm going to enable that, more logic on that later on. So we've enabled our DDNS on our system here. Again, make sure you got your two-step, make sure you've disabled SSH, make sure you've disabled your admin account, make sure you've removed any kind of serious control from users that are going to use this service, more and more and more and more. Again, check out part 6 for all of that. But we've gone in, we've got our remote access portal here that's utilizing the QNAP credentials. So it will bounce from the QNAP relay point there on the MyQNAPCloud. Again, you will need to log in when you do want to access it, and also there will be trusted devices and rechecks happening in the background. So if you're coming in from an untrusted or unknown device from the past, you will have to re-verify with that QNAP account. So there's lots of little levels there, but I still wouldn't be overly reliant on that to get in. Now, as straightforward as that is, we need to touch on that isn't the only horse in the race. And if you want to use these relay services to communicate with your QNAP NAS remotely, you don't necessarily have to use their own systems here. If you choose, there's two other highly recommended options available to you. Number one is a system called Tailscale. We've done a whole dedicated video on Tailscale, and if you want to go ahead with Tailscale, it is a relay system, not unlike what you've seen so far, but also it uses VPN tunnels. So this is what a normal VPN would look like. You'd be going through a VPN service provider, and all of your devices accessing and communicating via that VPN, hiding the data as it transmits through from point to point. That would mean you're accessing it through those VPN tunnels there. Performance will be a lot lower, it has to be said, but there is an element of anonymity. Now, the way Tailscale works is you set up individual devices, each with a Tailscale client, each of which are communicating directly while bouncing through Tailscale, allowing connectivity to be anonymous and untracked. So rather than all going through one access point and communicating via, say, a VPN server, more on that later, Tailscale allows you to create those encrypted tunnels between your mobile, your desktop client devices, and your NAS. And it's completely accessible and installable here on the QNAP NAS platform. If we open up a new tab here, we can find our setup video where we actually set up Tailscale for the very first time there for you. Let's get that turned down there in the background. And again, there's a full setup and installation guide set up from the ground up, allowing and showing you exactly how to bridge a bunch of devices on Tailscale remotely, but also utilizing unique encrypted VPN tunnels. Highly recommend utilizing that, and that should be linked in the description. The same goes for another service that's included on the QNAP platform there, and that is Teamviewer. You can go ahead if you choose and use that old fan favorite Teamviewer. Teamviewer, pretty much the same logic there. You are having a bunch of devices here that can all communicate and share screen, if you will, but also allow control. But with Teamviewer, you do get direct portal access there. So the fidelity is actually a great deal better than traditional Tailscale, where you're using the viewing window, because of the way QNAP NAS systems are designed to be remote accessible. Again, both that and Tailscale can be used completely for free. You can get free login credentials for that if you're a home user. Business users, play fair, you've got to pay for it. But ultimately, both of those supported services will allow remote access via certified connections or using encrypted certificates to allow access there. And while we're talking about the subject of certificates, that is also going to be a very valid concern for a number of you who are going to be accessing this system remotely, either by utilizing a direct access point or using a relay system. So again, direct access, or you're going to be using a relay point there for one of the services we've discussed. It's worth highlighting that you're going to want a certificate on the NAS for encryption, because that means that the data being transmitted back and forth is verified to be closed, uninterrupted, and secure. Again, when you set up the QNAP NAS for the first time with MyQNAPCloud, it will provide a certificate there, but you can use other ones. You can create a brand new one utilizing certificates from companies like Let's Encrypt for free. The options are there, open to you. If you're running the system on a closed local area network, the majority of system admins will tell you don't need to have certificate in place. I would kind of disagree with some of those users because you never know when certain apps and services are going to be utilizing external services. In theory, none of them should, and you can utilize the network switch controller alongside a lot of the permissions within the admin user area to make sure that doesn't happen. But nonetheless, it never hurts to have a Let's Encrypt certificate at the very least running there on the QNAP in the background to ensure that even LAN access is not being treated as not secure. You'll know whether you've got a certificate in place because once you go into the MyQNAPCloud remote access portal, you'll see alongside the stuff that's working, you can see there on the bottom right, SSL certificate not installed. Also, of course, at the top left, it will say unsecure. Now, the MyQNAPCloud certificate, if you want to get an additional one to the one that was listed earlier on, you can download a brand new one, but it is subject to licensing on the QNAP side of thing via their software store and licensing center. But you can go ahead with a free Let's Encrypt certificate straight away, registered to the domain and email that you utilized and you associated with that account there. So click confirm and it will download and install that Let's Encrypt certificate, which generally has a time limit on it of validity, which you can see on there, and that will just take a little moment to install on there. Let's fast forward to that being downloaded and installed, and then we'll make our way to talk just a little bit about DDNS before we move on to VPN server utilization. Don't even need to skip forward. Boom, there it is on there with automatic renewal. Lovely stuff. So with the DDNS setup and the naming of your system on that dynamic local / external access there to ensure your remote connection is stable, bear in mind your your remote IP address will be visible on this page. If you want to change the naming of your DDNS, you can go through it on here, or you can go ahead, of course, and copy and paste it into a new tab whenever you choose. Now, alongside things like account protection and there's a two-step verification there, and checking the IP for overusage and people trying to log in so they can be banned or at the very least held to one side for at least 30 minutes before they can try again. It is worth highlighting for remote access to go into the access control area and change just what level of access remote connectivity is going to have. So for example, if you go with a customized option, you can make sure that via this remote access portal that you are establishing here, you can change just what level of control is afforded via that portal. What can be done, and more importantly, what can't be done and what it can be connected to for remote access. So again, the level of remote access, whether it is for just remote access for, configuration, monitoring or repairs and troubleshooting, all right the way down to file transmission, that can be configured quite easily. Now, moving away from some of those relay services and of course the bit in the middle using DDNS and the naming of the system, what about if you want to utilize the system as a VPN server? Now, it's worth highlighting the difference really quick between a VPN server and a VPN client, or just VPN use in general. Normally when you see things like NordVPN and all the different million squillion kinds of VPN that you see on the market, they are working as client tools. You're utilizing a VPN client via a login credential, and you're accessing a private portal that you can run all of your internet traffic through from your local system in order to ensure that it is encrypted. You're basically utilizing the VPN wall to muddle around and hide all the information they're going afterwards. Now, using the NAS as a VPN server is ever so slightly different. What you are doing is you are accessing the NAS remotely via an encrypted tunnel, and then everything else afterwards is subject to the local LAN and the local internet connection that the QNAP NAS is within. So, for example, this gives you the benefits of, one, you want your system to look like it is a local system there next to the QNAP. You can use VPN servers to assume the identity of a local device on that local area network over there, which might be good for, geolocation and IP tracking on websites or even streaming services. But on top of that, you would use that service to funnel through that internet connection and have access to its own, laws and rules of the internet. But more importantly, once you go through the QNAP NAS VPN server, it won't hide what you're doing from that particular ISP unless you install a VPN gateway or client after that. Now, As we look at the layout, we mentioned earlier on when we're connecting through for the QNAP to work as a VPN server, bear in mind performance numbers are going to differ, and the setup of different VPN servers and protocols will change from provider to provider. Let's head in to the VPN server application there, QVPN service. Also bear in mind that if you're going to be utilizing their own QBelt service, with QBelt it is utilized alongside their companion app that you would install as in a client, much like you would with even the likes of Norton VPN, where you install a client on the mobile or desktop device to establish that VPN point into the QNAP working as a VPN server there. So you would go ahead, you would go with the IP, whichever IP it is suggesting. At this point it's 10602, right the way through to the full spectrum of the 255 different IPs there, or 254 in this case. A pre-share key you could create, and this is not so much like a password but more a verification key that's utilized much like an encryption key would be used on a locked file storage. So make sure every user that's going to be involved in this virtual IP level access remotely have got that pre-share key in place. So we would give that a pre-share key password. Again, the severity of that is really up to you. You've decided how many clients, that is, number of devices using that login there. So if we dig in there, go into the DNS server details, then go ahead. Our options are to use pre-existing public DNS services, or we can use those existing NAS DNS services we talked about, or just go full manual. If you go for the public DNS services there's quite a lot to choose from. Again, they're all fairly broken down quite neatly there. You can choose which one you want, and they even break down into the latency you want to choose. So for example, if we go for the Google option there, it allows us, that's the DNS 8888. Go ahead and apply that to our pre-existing setup there, and there you go. After you select apply, it now creates that for us to utilize as a remote access point to the via QVPN onto our NAS system there. But there may well be users that are already utilizing a pre-existing VPN or VPN server service like OpenVPN or WireGuard, and these are supported on the QNAP platform there. Again, very similar interface here, allowing you to go through, create that DNS identity for your OpenVPN account there. So again, we've got the details all listed there. Do take note of the port information, whether it is that you're going to be utilizing WireGuard, whether it is you're going to be using OpenVPN. And with QBelt, it was slightly different because you are utilizing the pre-existing QNAP services. But if you do use VPN, OpenVPN, make note of that IP there, because when you do utilize that IP and create this connection to your QNAP NAS, so we go ahead and create that OpenVPN setup. Once it's created, we can go in and download that configuration file that we're going to need to use for OpenVPN. So for example, we save that locally on the local PC. We allow it to keep it because Chrome really does not like the sound of those files. Go into the download section there, and we would open up that file that we've just downloaded. Opening that file up shows us the information we're going to need. I've already blocked out the IP, but that's going to be the external IP you're going to be utilized, and whatever your DNS that you created for this service will also be visible on there as well once you've created that. But once you've got that there, what you need to do is save this file locally, then go into OpenVPN, and using OpenVPN download the local client to your Windows or Mac system or mobile device there, and then utilize that config file that we just downloaded there in order to see exactly how to connect with our system, and therefore establish that OpenVPN connection to assume the identity for your local device into that new LAN subnetwork there. And again, depending on the device you want to use and the VPN services that best suit your needs to turn the NAS into a VPN server, go for the one that suits you best. But ultimately, the QBelt one is arguably the most streamlined, as it's QNAP's own service there, and you can attach that pretty quickly indeed. On top of that, you make sure that you are deciding which users have access. Really important, because if you're going to go ahead and start willy-nilly giving remote access to users, make sure those users via the control panel have their wings significantly clipped, or at the very least have SSH disabled. Again, ensure your admin account is disabled, and of course ensure that those users do not have too much power, because you are creating now a publicly identifiable entrance point into your QNAP NAS. Now, once you've established, one or even more remote access connections via a QVPN onto your system to use the NAS as that VPN server entrance point there. Do bear in mind it will be laid out with regard to different physical connections on the system. If this isn't clear enough for you on the overview, head into the Network Connections Manager, and alongside monitoring that DDNS and turning it on and turning it off, in fact, if you want to, for reasons of security, precaution and concern, you can head into and find out what the interfaces are on the system and then bind them, or at least see over an overview what is doing what. And finally, on to what might be the most hair-raising area for a lot of users, and that is port forwarding. Because if you're not going to be using one of those relay services, you're going to need to communicate with your router, your internet access point, in order to allow a small sliver of space for this connection to work through. Do you remember when we were sorting out these connections, I highlighted the service port? That port is going to be invaluable, because you are going to need to not only tap into the QNAP back end, go into things like QFirewall and allow an entrance into that port point we've established, but you're going to have to dip into your own router from your internet service provider, or if you're using a paid premium one, if you do have, for example, a premium business router and you've still got the junction router type box that the internet is coming through, you will need to adapt the ports for both of those devices to allow this connection to run through smoothly. Again, port forwarding will differ wildly depending on, one, the level of support. You know, your internet service providers are quite notorious for giving routers that don't even allow this for security reasons, but also the GUI will change. Just look out for a whole section based on security. Look for terms like port forwarding, port triggering, MAC filtering, stuff like that. On the QNAP side of things, head into the area, add profiles, adapt some of the existing profiles you've got there, and you can go ahead and start creating new IPv4 or even IPv6 rules that allow you to add those new IP addresses in there. Again, don't forget the subnet masks as appropriate. Popping them in there and allowing you, if you're going to be utilizing those domains as well, you can filter them through there. Entering them, again, is going to be very suspect to your own setup and the remote ports you are utilizing. If you don't know what you're doing, don't use this video to show you how to open this up. If you don't know what you're doing, do not do this, should be the big takeaway there. Because as easy as it is to dig out that IP, dig out what we're doing there, enter that into there, open up the port that we're going to be utilized, enter into, you know, the usual subnet masks there, or even going with, 0 at the end. It doesn't make a difference, because if you don't know what you're doing, you shouldn't be doing this. Because at this point, this is how things like deadbolt do happen. Because allowing remote access to your QNAP NAS from the outside is a risky gambit. At least when it's on the LAN. I'm not going to say it's still 100% secure, but it's more secure off the internet than it is on. And therefore, if you're going to go online, if you are going to start introducing QNAP's remote services, Tailscale, Teamviewer, if you're going to be using DDNS via a VPN server and opening up ports and firewalls, all of these actions not only introduce attack vectors, but on top of that, if you have not created a robust QNAP NAS system as detailed in part 6 of this series, when we were talking about user credentials, security, two-step, IP blocking and more, you are leaving yourself open to attack. Check out part 6. Rewatch this video if you've got any concerns. Any more questions, let me know in the comments. Of course, we've got the free advice section. Of course, you can go ahead and contact us on there. You can contact us via one of several different portals, from the Community Access Forum all the way through to recommended first and third party forums and subreddits, as well as our Discord as well. And again, free advice within 3 to 5 working days, or if you need it the next working day, use our fast track service or head over to Ko-Fi or Patreon to access the membership tier for regular expedited service, as well as arranging a Zoom with me already to help you along the way. But apart from that, thank you so much for watching. I'll see you in the next part in this series, where we look at advanced storage technique and provisions.